Here are Graham Hancock's most extraordinary ideas about ancient civilizations, lost worlds that may have risen, flourished, and vanished long before history began. From mysterious temples buried beneath the sands to ancient maps that seem to remember continents now drowned beneath the sea. These are the theories that make you wonder if humanity's story has been told more than once. But before we go any further, Graham gives a warning, one that changes how you see everything that comes next.
Canvas gets much wider and much broader, and we go back into deep time and have to consider the possibility that the ability that we pride ourselves for, the ability to create civilizations, was present in our ancestors tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps even more than 500,000 years ago. And this just rips the rug out from under the feet of rips the foundations, to use a better metaphor, from beneath the house of history that archaeologists have built.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing. It's because we have these models of history that we developed, or not we, but that, archaeology or history developed.
We collectively as a society, and in that society, it is archaeologists who are specifically tasked with investigating and understanding the past. And that's why I talk about the abuse of archaeological power, because it's like a doctor telling you, you must take this vaccine because it's better for you, without giving us any choice in the matter. And that's the same with archaeology. They say, we know best, this is how it is, and everything else is wrong. And this can't be a productive way to proceed in the future.
After hearing that warning, you start to understand what Graham means. Because for him, history doesn't begin in Egypt or Mesopotamia. It begins much earlier, in a forgotten age, when the world was still frozen in ice, and an advanced civilization may have already walked the earth.
It would be better to describe it as a foundational sense of puzzlement and incompleteness in the story that we are taught about our past, which envisages more or less, there have been a few ups and downs, but more or less straightforward evolutionary progress. We start out as hunter-foragers, then we become agriculturalists. The hunter-forager phase could go back hundreds of thousands of years. This is where it's also important to mention that anatomically modern humans were not the only humans. We had Neanderthals from 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago. They were certainly human because anatomically modern humans interbred with them, and we carry Neanderthal genes. There were the Denisovans, maybe 300,000 to perhaps even as recently as 30,000 years ago. And again, interbreeding took place. They're obviously a human species. So, we've got this background of humans who didn't look quite like us. And then we have anatomically modern humans. And I think the earliest anatomically modern human skeletal remains are from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and date to about 310,000 years ago. So the question is, what were our ancestors doing after that? And I think we can include the Neanderthals and the Denisovans in that general picture. And why did it take so long? This is one of the puzzles, one of the questions that bother me. Why did it take so long when we have creatures who are physically identical to us? We cannot actually weigh and measure their brains, but from the work that's been done on the crania, it looks like they had the same brains that we do, with the same wiring. So if we've been around for 300,000 plus years at least, and if ultimately in our future was the process to create civilization or civilizations, why didn't it happen sooner? Why did it take so long? Why was it such a long time? Even the story of anatomically modern humans has kept on changing. I remember a time when it was said that there hadn't been anatomically modern humans before 50,000 years ago. And then it became 196,000 years ago with the findings in Ethiopia, and then 310,000 years ago. There's a lot of missing pieces in the puzzle there. But the big question for me in that timeline is, why didn't we do it sooner? Why did it take so long? Why did we wait until after 12,000 years ago, really after 10,000 years ago, to start seeing the beginnings, what are selected as the beginnings of civilization in places like Turkey, for example. And then there's a relatively slow process of adopting agriculture, and by 6,000 years ago, we see ancient Sumer emerging as a civilization. And we're then in the pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt as well, 6,000 years ago, beginning to see definite signs of what will become the dynastic civilization of Egypt about 5,000 years ago. And interestingly, round about the same time, you have the Indus Valley civilization popping up out of nowhere. And by the way, the Indus Valley civilization was a lost civilization until the 1920s, when railway workers accidentally stumbled across some ruins. I've been to Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and these are extraordinarily beautifully centrally planned cities. Clearly they're the work of an already sophisticated civilization. One of the things that strikes me about the Indus Valley civilization is that we find a steatite seal of an individual seated in a recognizable yoga posture. And that seal is 5,000 years old. And the yoga posture is Mula Bandhasana, which involves a real contortion of the ankles and twisting the feet back. It's an advanced yoga posture. So there it is 5,000 years ago. And that then raises the question, well, how long did yoga take to get to that place when it was already so advanced 5,000 years ago? What's the background to this? China, the Yellow River civilization. Again, it's around about the same period, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, you get these first signs of something happening. So it's very odd that all around the world, we have this sudden upsurge of civilization about 6,000 years ago, preceded by what seems like a natural evolutionary process that would lead to a civilization. And yet, certain ideas being carried down and manifested and expressed in many of these different civilizations. I just find that whole idea very puzzling and very disturbing, especially when I look at this radical break that takes place in not just the human story, but the story of all life on Earth, which was the last great cataclysm that the Earth went through, which was the Younger Dryas event. It was an extinction level event. That's when all the great megafauna of the Ice Age went extinct. It's after that event that we start seeing this, what are taken to be the beginnings of the first gradual steps towards civilization. We come out of the Upper Paleolithic, as it's defined, the old end of the Old Stone Age, and into the Neolithic. And that's when the wheels are supposedly set in motion to start civilization rolling. But what happened before that, and why did that suddenly happen then? And I can't help feeling, and I've felt this for a very long while, that there are major missing pieces in our story. It's often said that I'm claiming to have proved that there was an advanced lost civilization in the Ice Age, and I am not claiming to have proved that. That is a hypothesis that I am putting forward to answer some of the questions that I have about prehistory, and I think it's worthwhile to inquire into those possibilities, because the Younger Dryas event was a massive global cataclysm, whatever caused it. And it's strange that just after it, we start seeing these first signs.
So the current understanding in mainstream archaeology is that after the Younger Dryas is when the civilizations popped up in different places of the globe with a lot of similarities, but they popped up independently.
Yeah, independently and by coincidence. And by coincidence, those big civilizations that we all remember as the first civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley civilization, China, they all pop up at pretty much the same time. That is the mainstream view. Yeah.
And they don't just pop up; they kind of build up gradually. First, there's some settlements.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And then there's different dynamics of how they build up, and the role of agriculture in that is also non-obvious, but it's just there's first a kind of settlement, a stabilization of where the people are living, then they start using agriculture, then they start getting urban centers and that kind of stuff.
It seems like an entirely reasonable argument. Everything about that makes sense. There is no doubt that you're seeing evolutionary progress, social evolution taking place in those thousands of years before Sumer emerges.
But if such a civilization really existed, then something must have happened to wipe it out. Graham believes the answer lies not in myth, but in a cataclysm so massive, it nearly reset the story of humanity itself.
The moment that you consider the possibility that some kind of cataclysm, was it an impact of multiple fragments of a disintegrating comet? That's my favorite scenario at the moment, but it's not the only one. Professor Robert Schoch at Boston University attributes the onset of the Younger Dryas cataclysmic climate episode to changes in solar activity. The reason why it happened is not clear. We may have our favorite points of view, and I think the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is the strongest. But I'm open to many other hypotheses as well that consider this bizarre climate episode called the Younger Dryas that set in about 12,800 years ago and ended about 11,600 years ago. And whatever caused it, it was horrendously cataclysmic. And I think that's the point where we become a species with amnesia, where we lose track, we lose our memory of what went before. But it bothers me that it's the moment one starts talking about a cataclysm bringing an end to a former civilization, that this is what brings the swarm of bees down upon you. Why is there this fear of talking about cataclysms? I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but does somebody know that this is that what goes around comes around? That certainly in terms of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, we do pass through the Taurid meteor stream twice a year, and the Taurid meteor stream contains dozens of enormous objects which are the remnants of a fragmented comet. Is it possible that somebody knows something that we don't know, or is it just that it's kind of considered bad taste to talk about cataclysms? Why do they provoke such a reaction from the mainstream?
I think it's because we think in very short timescales. We think in the timescale of a human life, 100 years, or at most the timescale of our civilization, 5,000 years. Yeah. But it's obvious that Earth has been profoundly shaped by cataclysms, by natural disaster, by natural events, and has done throughout the history of our species. As we say, we've been around for so long, and the Earth has been subject to incredibly devastating things during that time that has both the potential to wipe out human culture and to erase the geological and archaeological record clean that those cultures ever existed. And I think that people are so opposed to it because we have lived in this stable period for the last 12,000 years. And so in our human brains, it's like, oh, the climate is fine. We don't have these massive natural disasters that impact the entire planet or vast regions of the planet. But you just have to look at the kind of geological record of the Earth to see that we do, and that we have been living in an abnormal time because it's warm and stable. But the norm is cataclysm and massive changes in temperature and huge events that can completely disrupt the climate and human populations on the Earth. And then when you look at the Younger Dryas, which is probably the most recent one that you could define as a kind of cataclysmic climate event, the climate was getting warm, the climate was getting stable. Civilization could have, begun, flourished, or already existed. And then we have this dramatic event. We have this horrific event for whoever was living there. And as you say, no matter what it is that caused it, that can be debated. And we haven't fully established that yet, but the fact is it was a completely horrific climate shift that would have been devastating for human culture in whatever form it was that lived on the planet at that time, and stayed devastating for the best part of 1,000 years, I think. So I don't understand why because we debate what caused the Younger Dryas, that kind of shoves away the fact that the Younger Dryas was a very dramatic event and definitely had the potential to cause severe devastation. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where I land on the debate. I think there's very good merits to the Comet Research Group, and I've looked into their work a bit. I did a small video on that. I didn't do too much of a deep dive, but I did a little bit of an inquiry into the potential of a comet striking 12,000 years ago. And there's obviously some interesting kind of mythological evidence, if you want to call it that, for such a thing occurring. But yeah, I don't fall into any camp particularly, but I think it definitely...
By the way, while you're looking at the different camps, do take a look at Robert Schoch's excellent work on the possible involvement of the sun in the Younger Dryas events. Robert Schoch is another person, a professor of geology at Boston University, who's stuck his neck out and taken the slings and arrows of hatred that have been projected at him by, again, this small group of archaeologists who seem to want to own the past. Robert has stuck his neck out and taken those risks and put his reputation on the line and carried on doing excellent geological work. And again, I feel this is worth recognizing. So I hope you'll take a look into Robert's take on the Younger Dryas as well.
Yeah, I will. And as you say, that's another thing that can cause massive disruption on this planet. And there are just so many different factors that we just do not appreciate what we've been through as a species, what we know we have been through, because we know that our species is at least 300,000 years old. We know our species is now potentially, up to 1 million years old when we diverged. So we have been through some incredible things. And it's both testament to how good we are as survivors, but it's also testament to how much could have happened, how many stories, how many human lives, how many cultures potentially flourished, rose and fell in our deep past. And the history of the Earth is so brutal. The fact that we made it through, do we really expect that nothing happened and that we just kept going up and that we didn't have any setbacks, that nothing pushed us back? It doesn't make sense to me. And yeah, I mean, Dr. Robert Schoch is a very, very interesting guy. I've obviously looked into his work on the Sphinx with John Anthony West, and very interesting. That ties into the Green Sahara that you were talking about earlier, which is a bizarre thing that's never made sense to me. That
Well, I'm just planning. I think we were talking off air about that, but I'm actually about to take a big trip right across the Sahara. Because the fact of the matter is that the Sahara was green and fertile for several thousand years before ancient Egypt appears as an archaeologically recognizable civilization along the banks of the Nile. I have to wonder whether some of the mystery of the origins of ancient Egyptian civilization may lie in the Sahara Desert, which we know for sure had lakes, had rivers, had grasslands, had savanna, was a nurturing and positive environment for thousands of years, certainly from 10, 11,000 years ago down to about 7,000 or 6,000 years ago. And then suddenly ancient Egypt appears as a fully developed pre-dynastic Egypt, as a fully developed civilization on the banks of the Nile. And it's the background to these things. It's the same with Mesopotamia. When we go there, ancient Sumer actually doesn't just come out of nothing. There is a background to that as well. I'm interested in looking at all of that. Just to round up on the Cataclysm issue, I've noticed that when I talk about the Younger Dryas, which was undoubtedly a massive climate change event that took place between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, whatever caused it. When I talk about that, quite often on YouTube will add a warning telling viewers that this contains counterfactual information about climate. So it seems that maybe the reason that certain archaeologists are just so dismissive of the role of cataclysms in the human story is because the role of those cataclysms to some extent undermines the climate change ideology being entirely caused by human beings, which is now very much in the air. In fact, it's one of those things that you can hardly question without having a swarm of attacks descending upon you. Now, I'm not saying that there is no climate change. There is climate change today, for sure. It's minor by comparison with what happened during the Younger Dryas, but there is climate change today. And I think that the broader factors that cause climate change need to be taken into account as well as human activity. That doesn't mean that I think we're doing things right as human beings. I think we should love and nurture and care for our planet. I think we should do everything right by our planet because our planet has been doing right by us. This is our home. This is our garden in the universe. This is where we live, where our future is, where our children and our grandchildren will grow up. We have to take care of it, nurture it, love it, look after it, not pollute it, not destroy it. But the climate change narrative is using fear to make people afraid, and that is counterproductive. If we want human beings to behave in a better way towards the planet, it's not creating a false narrative about how we're the cause of everything. It's understanding that we could behave in a much better way towards the planet, and we don't need fear to drive us that. We just need intelligence and love and respect for this planet that has given us life.
Yeah, I mean, both things can be true, right? Like, yes, we should definitely treat the planet with more respect, and we should try and clean up our act for sure. But also, this buys into the whole kind of arrogance almost of the modern view. We think we know everything that happened in the past. We think we are the biggest, influencer on the climate, but we're clearly not. You just have to look at the temperature record of the last 300,000 years or last million years. And I got similar warnings on some of my videos where I talk about these topics, and I'm literally just discussing the temperature graphs and saying, look, it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down, and we're currently up. We don't want to go down. And yet I still get flagged for, disrupting the climate change narrative, because we do not want it to get cold. Global warming is bad, but global cooling, dramatic global cooling, would be devastating for our civilization, and has potentially been devastating for civilizations that occurred in the past.
In one of his talks with Joe Rogan, Graham goes even deeper. He starts to describe how those ancient civilizations might have thought, how they lived, what they valued, and why their entire worldview seems to echo something we've lost.
Well, I think people can develop these patterns of behavior that are destructive with anything, whether it's with alcohol or cannabis or,
Yes.
sex or anything. People get in ruts.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't mean that the cannabis is bad. It means that you are on a bad mental path.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm not encouraging it for everybody, because some people, it genuinely biologically doesn't jive with them.
Yeah. But the fundamental thing is, we as adult human beings need to take responsibility for our own lives and our own decisions. And we need not hand that responsibility over to governmental institutions, especially when it concerns something as intimate and personal as our consciousness. And my view is the ancient world had the right attitude to this kind of thing, and the modern world does not, and that we can sit down and learn a lot from the ancient world. A lot of people ask me, Hancock, you've been arguing that there's been a lost civilization in the human story, but what sort of civilization do you think it was? Well, one of the things I think is it was a civilization that used psychedelics. I think it was a civilization that emerged from shamanism, but did not stay at the hunter-gatherer stage, but that took the essence of shamanism and integrated it into a very different kind of civilization from our own, which pursued things in different ways. A lot of archaeologists have said to me, but we don't find any plastic bottles from the Ice Age. That means there was no advanced civilization during the Ice Age. Well, hang on. Maybe an advanced civilization might have decided never to get involved in plastic in the first place. Maybe there would have been a clear choice not to make plastic. Maybe they did things in completely different ways. Maybe they cultivated powers of the human mind that we dismiss and regard as completely unimportant. Woo-woo.
Yeah, this is the thoughts about Egypt, correct?
It's about Egypt and about other things. I mean, the specific example I give is above the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid are 5 further chambers. And these chambers are roofed and floored with granite beams that weigh about 70 tons each. And there are hundreds of them. And these 70-ton granite beams, which to put in context, a 70-ton beam is equivalent in weight to 35 large SUVs. These 70-ton granite beams have been elevated to a height of more than 350 feet above the ground and carefully and precisely placed in position. It is very hard for archaeologists to explain how that was done using purely leverage and mechanical advantage. You can say, perhaps they built a ramp and hauled the stones up the ramp. But then you have to confront basic laws of physics. You can't haul a stone weighing tens of tons up a slope that exceeds 10 degrees. Then you start doing the calculation. How long a ramp do I need with a 10-degree slope to get to 350 feet above the ground? And the answer is you need a fucking fucking long ramp, which should still be there, because it couldn't have been a sand ramp. It would have collapsed under the weight of those stones. It had to be as massive as the pyramid itself. So this begins to seem like an absurd idea, the idea that is foisted on us by archaeology. Maybe the idea that they regard as absurd, namely that psychic powers were cultivated by ancient civilizations, that they could use powers of the human mind that we have allowed to lapse. Maybe that idea deserves further consideration. We have gone down a path of leverage and mechanical advantage. We're used to relying on machines, but we hear anecdotal reports of people who have telekinetic powers, who can move things with their minds, of people who have telepathic powers. And our automatic reaction is to just dismiss all of that because science says it's impossible, because science regards consciousness as local to the brain and doesn't see how it can exert itself outside of that. But maybe we should open up to those possibilities, that we're dealing with a very different kind of culture that used techniques that we have allowed to lapse. And maybe we could wake those techniques up again. Maybe the ability of human beings to do almost superhuman things is resident within all of us, but sleeping.
Well, it's pure speculation that they use some sort of a telekinetic power, but it's
pure
absolute,
speculation.
But it's absolute that they did something that we don't understand. If you think about the distance between us and the construction, just the modern accepted construction dates of the Great Pyramid, it's more than 5,000 years ago, or close to 5,000 years ago.
Great Pyramid is supposed to be about 4,500 years old,
That's really old.
It's incredibly
like,
old,
To think that someone back then could do something that would perplex us today with modern machinery. And that somehow or another they figured this out. It's almost like what they had done was leave behind something that was so stupendous, so monstrously impressive that it would transcend time. And that you would have to look at it even thousands and thousands of years later and say, hey, like this defies conventional explanation. This is not a simple, and I've seen some of the conventional explanations of the construction of the pyramid, and they conveniently neglect those chambers above the king's chamber.
They do.
They conveniently neglect a lot of those massive stones. And it's because it's one of those things you just go, oh, I don't know. What is this, Jamie?
There are the chambers above the king's chambers, and each one of those floors consists of a row of 70-ton granite blocks that have been raised 350 feet above the ground. And not only that, but brought from Aswan in the south of Egypt, 500 kilometers south of the Great Pyramid. So,
if there's any time in history where you could go in a time machine and go back and observe, would that be the time?
I am just completely fascinated by the Ice Age at the moment.
If you had one shot to go back and see what it was like in some place, you wouldn't go to the construction of the Great Pyramids?
I think right now where I'd go is 12,800 years ago in the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
Just to see.
Because I think that's where the whole human story changes. I think that's where we change tracks from one path to another path. And following those cataclysmic events of the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, following those, the signs of civilization that we see emerging are not the beginnings of civilization. They're a restarting of civilization that had existed before the cataclysm. And for that reason, I would like to be present during that cataclysmic event, if only to satisfy myself that it was indeed a comet. You see, the one thing there's no dispute about anymore is that the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm. You can't argue about that. The megafauna that die off, the disruption of human activity that takes place at that time, the huge climate changes. This was a cataclysm by any standards. Where the argument still goes on is what caused the cataclysm. I vote strongly for comet, multiple fragments of a comet hitting the North American ice cap and hitting Greenland as well. But there are other researchers in the field, like my colleague Robert Schoch, who thinks that the sun is more involved. This is healthy. This is very, very healthy, that we should be approaching this problem from many different perspectives and trying to figure out what the fuck caused this extraordinary event that occurs at a pivotal moment in the human story. The end of the Stone Age, the beginning of the Mesolithic, the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the current age of the Earth. And suddenly we see these signs of civilization appearing, and in places like Göbekli Tepe, those signs already include highly sophisticated knowledge. And that's why I feel we really need to investigate the Amazon. There are 3 places in the world which are really lacking in the investigation right now. One of them is the Amazon, 5.5 million square kilometers, very little archaeology done. Another is the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert, tough place to work. I can understand why there's little archaeology done there, but the Sahara Desert was green during the Ice Age. It had a completely different climate regime. We should consider the possibility that missing parts of the human story are there. And then under the continental shelves, because sea level rose 400 feet. These are 3 domains that archaeology has largely not investigated, and it has largely not done so. They say, well, why would we spend the money on marine archaeology? It's much better to spend it on looking for shipwrecks rather than looking for signs of a lost civilization, because we archaeologists know there was no lost civilization. So that's the argument for the resources there, and the same with the Amazon, and the same with the Sahara Desert. Very places in the world that those amongst us who are charged with the responsibility of interpreting the past have not looked at are the very places we should be looking at.
And that's when Graham takes the conversation to the stars. Because to understand the ancients, you have to look where they were looking at the sky. Their monuments weren't just temples or tombs. They were messages written in stone, aligned with constellations we still see today.
A puzzling thing is this sequence of numbers that are a result of the precession of the equinoxes. At least I think that's the best theory to explain them. Here, I think it's important to pay tribute to the work of Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschend. Giorgio de Santillana was professor of history of science, actually at MIT, where you're based, back in the 60s. And Hertha von Deschend was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. And they wrote an immense book in the 1960s called Hamlet's Mill. And Hamlet's Mill differs very strongly from established opinion on the issue of the phenomenon of precession, and I'll explain what precession is in a moment. Generally, it's held that it was the Greeks who discovered the precession. And the dating on that is put back not very far, maybe 2,300 years ago or so. Santillana and von Deschend are pointing out that knowledge of precession is much, much older than that, thousands of years older than that, and they do actually trace it, I think I'm quoting them pretty much correctly, to some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. Reading that book was one of the several reasons that I got into this mystery in the first place. Okay, now, the precession of the equinoxes, to give it its full name, results from the fact that our planet is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars. And our planet, of course, is rotating on its own axis at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. But what's less obvious is that it's also wobbling on its axis. And so if you imagine the extended north pole of the Earth pointing up at the sky, in our time, it's pointing at the star Polaris, and that is our pole star. But Polaris has not always been the pole star, precisely because of this wobble on the axis of the Earth. Other stars have occupied the pole position, and sometimes the extended north pole of the Earth points at empty space. There is no pole star. That's one of the obvious results of the wobble on the Earth's axis. The other one is that there are 12 well-known constellations in our time, the 12 constellations of the zodiac, that lie along what is referred to as the path of the sun. The Earth is orbiting the sun, and we're seeing what's behind it, what's in direct line with the sun in our view. And the zodiacal constellations all lie along the path of the sun. So at different times of the year, the sun will rise against the background of a particular zodiacal constellation. Today we live in the age of Pisces, and it's definitely not an accident that the early Christians used the fish as their symbol. This is another area where I differ from archaeology. I think the constellations of the zodiac were recognized as such much earlier than we suppose. Anyway, to get to the point, the key marker of the year, certainly in the northern hemisphere, was the spring equinox. The question was, what constellation is rising behind the sun? What constellation is housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox? Right now it's Pisces. In another 150 years or so, it'll be Aquarius. We do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Back in the time of the late ancient Egyptians, it was Aries, going back to the time of Ramesses or before. Before that, it was Taurus, and so on and so forth. It's backwards through the zodiac until 12,500 years ago, you come to the age of Leo, when the constellation of Leo houses the sun on the spring equinox. Now, this process unfolds very, 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 very slowly. The whole cycle, and it is a cycle, it repeats itself roughly every 26,000 years. Put a more exact figure on it, 25,920 years. That may be a convention. Some scholars would say it was a bit less than that, a bit more, but you're talking fractions. It's in that area, 25,920 years. And to observe it, you really need more than one human lifetime, because it unfolds very, very slowly at a rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And the parallel that I often give is hold your finger up to the horizon, the distant horizon. The movement in one lifetime in a period of 72 years is about the width of your finger. It's not impossible to notice in a lifetime, but it's difficult. You've got to pass it on. And what seems to have happened is that some ancient culture, the culture that Santillana and von Deschen call some almost unbelievable ancestor culture, worked out the entire process of precession and selected the key numbers of precession, of which the most important number, the governing number, is the number 72. But we also have numbers related to the number 72. 72 plus 36 is 108. 108 divided by 2 is 54. These numbers are also found in mythology all around the world. There were 72 conspirators who were involved in killing the god Osiris in ancient Egypt and nailing him up in a wooden coffer and dumping him in the Nile. There are 432,000 in the Rig Vesa. 432,000 is a multiple of 72. At Angkor in Cambodia, for example, you have the bridge to Angkor Thom, and on that bridge you have figures on both sides, sculpted figures, which are holding the body of a serpent. That serpent is Vasuki, and what they're doing is they're churning the Milky Ocean. It's the same metaphor of churning and turning that's defined in the story of Hamlet's mill, of Amlodi's mill. There are 54 on each side. 54 plus 54 is 108. 108 is 72 plus 36. It's a precessional number, according to the work that Santillana and von Deschen did. And the fascination with this number system and its discovery all around the world is one of the puzzles that intrigue me and suggest to me that we are looking at ancestral knowledge that was passed down, and probably was passed down from a specific single common source at one time, but then was spread out very, very widely around the world.
So one of the defining ways that you approach the study of human history that I think contrasts with mainstream archaeology is you take this sort of astronomical symbolism and the relationship between humans and the stars very seriously.
I do, as I believe the ancients did.
I think it's important to sort of consider what humans would have thought about back then. Now we have a lot of distractions. We have social media. We can watch videos on YouTube and whatever. But back then, especially before sort of electricity, the stars is like the sexiest thing to talk about.
There's no light pollution.
So there's that's
in your majesty of the heavens.
Every single night you're spending looking up at the stars, and you can imagine there's a lot of sort of status value to be the guy who's very good at studying the stars, and sort of the scientists of the day. And I'm sure there's going to be these geniuses that emerge that are able to do two things. One, tell stories about the gods or whatever based on the stars, and then also, as we'll probably talk about, use the stars practically for navigation, for example. And so like it makes sense that the stars had a primal importance for the ideas of the times, for the status, for religious explorations.
It was an ever-present reality.
Yes.
And it was bright, and it was brilliant, and it was full of lights. It's inconceivable that the ancients would not have paid attention to it. It was an overwhelming presence, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really confident that the constellations that we now recognize as the constellations of the zodiac were recognized much earlier, because it's hard to miss when you pay attention to the sky that the sun, over the course of the solar year, is month by month rising against the background of different constellations. And then there's a much longer process, the process of precession, which takes that journey backwards, and where we have a period of 2,160 years for each sign of the zodiac. I think it would have been hard for the ancients to have missed that. They might not have identified the constellations in exactly the same way we do today. That may well be a Babylonian or Greek convention, but that the constellations were there, I think was very clear, and that they were special constellations, unlike other ones higher up in the sky, which were not on the path of the sun, that people paid attention to.
Well, but detecting the precession of the equinox is hard, because especially they don't have any writing systems, they don't have any mathematical systems, so everything is told through words.
Yeah, they have. Let's not underestimate oral traditions. The oral traditions, that's something we've lost in our culture today. One of the things that happens with the written word is that you gradually lose your memory. Actually, there's a nice story from ancient Egypt about the god Thoth, the god of wisdom, who is very proud of himself because he has invented writing. Look at this gift, he says to a mythical pharaoh of that time. Look at the gift that I am giving humanity, writing. This is a wonderful thing. It'll enable you to preserve so much that you would otherwise lose. And the pharaoh in this story replies to him, no, you have not given us a wonderful gift. You have destroyed the art of memory. We will forget everything. Words will roam free around the world, not accompanied by any wise advice to set them into context. And actually, that's a very interesting point. And we do know that cultures that still do have oral traditions are able to preserve information for very long periods of time. One thing I think is clear in any time, in any period of history, is human beings love stories. We love great stories. And one way to preserve information is to encode it, embed it in a great story. And so carefully done that actually it doesn't matter whether the storyteller knows that they're passing on that information or not. The story itself is the vehicle, and as long as it's repeated faithfully, the information contained within it will be passed on. And I do think this is part of the story of the preservation of knowledge.
So that's one of the reasons that you take myths seriously.
I take them very seriously, and the other, many reasons, but I can't help being deeply impressed and deeply puzzled by the worldwide tradition of a global cataclysm within human memory. I mean, we know scientifically that there have been many, many cataclysms in the past going back millions of years. I mean, the best known one, of course, is the KPG event, as it's now called, that made the dinosaurs extinct 65 million or 66 million years ago. But has there been such a cataclysm in the lifetime of the human species? The Mount Toba eruption about 70,000 years ago was pretty bad. But a global cataclysm, the Younger Dryas, really ticks all the boxes as a worldwide disaster, which definitely involved sea level rise, both at the beginning and at the end of the Younger Dryas. It definitely involved the swallowing up of lands that previously had been above water. And I think it's an excellent candidate for this worldwide tradition of a global cataclysm, of which one of, but not the only, distinguishing characteristics was a flood, an enormous flood, and the submergence of lands that had previously been above water, underwater. The fact that this story is found all around the world suggests to me that the archaeological explanation is, look, people suffer local floods all the time. I mean, as we're talking, there's flooding in Florida, but I don't think anybody in Florida is going to make the mistake of believing that that's a global flood. They know it's local, but that's the argument largely of archaeology dealing with the flood myths, or that some local population experienced a nasty local flooding event, and they decided to say that it affected the whole world. I'm not persuaded by that, particularly since we know there was a nasty epoch, the Younger Dryas, when flooding did occur and when the Earth was subjected to events cataclysmic enough to extinguish entirely the megafauna of the Ice Age.
But the mystery doesn't stop with the stars, because far across the ocean, on another continent, a different civilization was building something just as extraordinary. That's where Graham begins to talk about the Olmecs and the riddle they left behind.
Do you have anything in this book about the Olmecs?
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
Could you explain that to people that maybe
in Fingerprints of the Gods? Yes. So it's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya. But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. Again, we don't know what they called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that rubber-producing area of Mexico. They worked in giant megalithic constructions. What they're most famous for is these huge carved human heads, which can be on a scale of up to 20 to 25 tons in weight, and which have curious features which have been interpreted variously as Polynesian, African, don't look like classic Native American features.
Keep that up.
But one of the things I've realized is that there is no classic Native American feature. That Native Americans are have a very complex genetic story with very many different elements brought into it, and we shouldn't be necessarily surprised by the supposedly non-Native American look of these Olmec heads.
What do we think those helmets were that they were wearing?
Nobody knows, because no physical example of such a helmet has ever been found, just like no physical example of an Egyptian pharaoh's crown has ever been found. All we see is the stone reproductions of them.
Do they universally wear these helmets in these stone reproductions?
They pretty much all wear these helmets in the Olmec stonework. There's another fascinating figure from La Venta, one of the Olmec sites, which is the earliest ever image of a plumed or feathered serpent. The feathered serpent is a famous icon in Central America. Quetzalcoatl, who's the god of peace, the bringer of civilization, who is associated, for example, with the famous pyramid of Kukulkan, which is just another name for Quetzalcoatl at Chichen Itza, where on the spring equinox a shadow effect creates the image of a serpent coiling down the stairway and joining with the carved head of the serpent. There's the image from La Venta. That's the earliest image of a plumed serpent in the Americas. And sitting in the middle of it, and I made a big deal out of this because I think it is a big deal in Magicians of the Gods, sitting in the middle of it is this human figure who's holding this strange bag in his hand. And it's just a fact that those identical bags are found in ancient Sumer in the hands of individuals who were considered to be civilization bringers, and they also show up on Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. I call them man bags. And in that case, at Göbekli Tepe, we know they're at least 11,600 years old. So I wonder if we're looking at a sort of badge of office of a group of civilizers who traveled around the world trying to bring back to life a lost.
When I interrupted you to talk about Quetzalcoatl, what were you about to say?
I can't remember.
Oh.
I'm in California. I've been smoking lots of dope, you know.
We were talking about different things in the Amazon. Should we rewind and figure out what we said?
Yeah, the serpent god you were talking about.
Before Quetzalcoatl, before that. I have another question. The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely. But the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines, Papua New Guinea, Melanesians, with those kind of features, now that we have the genetic evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to find out what that is. They've always fascinated me. The Olmecs, it's always been such a strange image, the large heads with the helmets on them, and how do they universally look like that? I mean, all of
the features are very, very similar.
Wow.
They're very, very, very similar.
And always with the helmets.
And almost always. I won't claim that every single Olmec head has a helmet of it, because I think I've seen one that didn't. It's quite a while ago since I explored the Olmec area. But what's fascinating about them is they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America, that they create structures on a massive scale, that you can see connections between them and the later Maya. That whole mystery of the Mayan calendar was clearly inherited from the Olmecs. It wasn't something the Maya made up. The Olmecs used that same symbolism. So the Mayan calendar is actually an Olmec calendar. And if we then consider the possibility that the Olmecs may just be the latest, the earliest surviving manifestation of that calendar, it could go back much further than that.
After everything he's uncovered, the ruins, the patterns, the warnings, Graham leaves us with one final thought, that maybe we're not the survivors of a forgotten past, but the next chapter waiting to be erased. Every great civilization believed it would last forever. None of them were right.
Yeah, well, we're the next lost civilization. That's what our civilization is today. We don't have to be, but choices need to be made. We have to change the path that all the big industrialized technological countries are on right now. Otherwise, it's not even going to take a cosmic disaster. We're going to bring ourselves down. Collapse and destroy our civilization, lose all the support systems that we've relied upon. And be put in a place where we have to rely only on ourselves again. And that will be very difficult. That's why I think our civilization today is fragile, because it looks strong. It's capable of incredible technological feats, but psychically, it's very fragile and not ready to confront the chaos that may come.
No doubt. And these stories from the past are important. And I think this is a point you make. It's a point that Matthias makes as well. Like, these stories of the past are important. And to not only show us, the classic, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. This is, so he actually had that woven into the story. So it was not only a particular time, but it was a particular mindset.
Is he when he has these past life experiences?
Full on, he has full access. So he has a phone with a stylus, and he takes notes to himself in Atlantean like cuniform, basically.
Right. So he's entering a trance-like state autonomously, without the need of. It's
just he calls himself. He's like, I'm a particular type of being that's like a memory cell, and whatever function that wipes out the memory and makes it like a dream for most people, I'm the one that was supposed to, I'm just built that I'm supposed to remember. And so he doesn't consider himself special or like it's a special gift. It's just like, I'm a memory cell in this collective, like one organ, like the call it the pituitary or whatever of all humanity. He's that one cell in that particular gland that's able to remember. And he's, he sings on my podcast, he sung some songs that he would sing to his daughter. And he was a woman in that life, and this life he's a gay man, and he's loving his life in this life, and he loved his life then, and he's singing songs to his daughter in this lullaby, and he sung that song, and there was something so human that woke up in me, some ancestral memory when I heard this Atlantean lullaby. And he's not a great singer. He's not, trying to be a performing artist, but it was just sung like a mother would sing to their daughter. And it was so powerful. Like, of all the things, of course, I approach all of these things skeptically. I don't actually even believe in astrology and numerology. I'm open to it, but I've never found anything compelling. I'm not like super into all of these phenomenons. But when I hear his song, and my body knows it as a real song and knows it as, I know it is true. It's just this interesting thing. And of course, all of his wisdom matches up.
Resonates at the heart level.
Exactly. Resonates at the heart level. Like I feel it. And everything that he's saying, correlates with everything that you're writing. So the scientific evidence of the past. And then also what he's talking about the cosmos correlates with my 23 years of psychedelic adventuring, where I've just, all of the entities and the dimensionality and all these experiences. There's so much correlation that I haven't found any dissonance between that which I know internally and that which I've learned from, individuals like yourself about the past.
Yeah.
So it's been really like a beautiful relationship to have. And he's just a great human being. And he can enter trance states as well and then channel other different types of energies. But he has waking access to that memory.
What's often forgotten is that DMT is a natural brain hormone.
Right.
It's present in all human beings and in fact in almost all animal life, but usually in sub-psychedelic quantities. Some people may have a bit more of it than others, and it may just open those doorways that are normally closed for most of us without help of psychedelics. It's an interesting phenomenon, actually, that a natural brain hormone is illegal, but that's the world we live in today. What he was saying also really strongly supported by Plato, who's the earliest surviving tradition of Atlantis is passed down to us by Plato, who makes it clear that his ancestor Solon learned the story in ancient Egypt, and indeed speaks of how Atlantis was once a beautiful civilization, but that how it became cruel and how it began to impose its will upon others, to use its technology to gain power. That it ceased to wear its prosperity with moderation, and in response to that, the universe finally had enough and struck it down. I think the balance between human beings and the universe is something else that's ignored in our civilization today. We are part of the universe, and our behavior and even our thoughts have universal implications that we are taught to ignore at our peril.